It's a new day, and it's a new Uber. Uber's making moves. After becoming known as the cesspool for sexual harassment in tech, they're starting to clean up their image. They just hired their first ever chief diversity officer. Uber has hired Bo-Young Lee, the former global diversity and inclusion leader of insurance company Marsh LLC, to be its first ever chief diversity officer. Lee will begin in March, Recode first reported. This means Uber's global head of diversity and inclusion, Bernard Coleman, will now be reporting to her. Now, most people would think these titles are bullshit, but Uber one-ups everybody else, and they actually have two people. They have a global head of diversity and inclusion and a chief diversity officer. Two people doing one job. But some people, including writers at TechCrunch, aren't too happy about this decision. It's no surprise Uber now has a chief diversity officer, given the recommendations from former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and his law firm. What's surprising, however, is that the job isn't going to Coleman. In Holder's report, he and his firm recommended Coleman's title be elevated to Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and that he report to the CEO. It's not clear why the role did not go to Coleman. What a time we live in. A woman is given a C-level position, Chief Diversity Officer, at a company as big as Uber. And we have writers at TechCrunch asking why she got the job. A woman, C-level. This is what they wanted. But this decision isn't that easy. See, yes, on one hand, we have a woman who could be in a C-level position. We need more of those, right? And on the other hand, we have Bernard Coleman, who's a guy. Why do we need more men in C-level positions? But Bernard is black. So we have a trade-off here. Do we want more diversity in a C-level position, but another man? Or do we want a woman, but she's Asian? There's plenty of those in tech. Quite the diversity dilemma here for Uber. If only we had some sort of tool that could help make these decisions for us. Oppression Check is here to solve your diversity and inclusion needs. The first thing you'll see are two forms, one for each candidate. Within each form, you'll be provided 5 options to specify: race, religion, sexual orientation, preferred gender pronoun, and gender. Complete both forms for each candidate, click Get Results, and you'll be provided with a detailed audit specifying which candidate is the preferred choice and why. Wait, that's exactly what Uber needs. All right, let's check this out. OppressionCheck.com. Okay, so we have an Asian woman and a black man. So we'll put in our race here. We don't know religion, so we'll just put those as other. Sexual orientation, we'll assume here, along with preferred gender pronouns, we'll assume him being a man. He goes by he, him. And then gender, we'll also leave those as cis as well. All right, here we go. Did Uber make the right decision? I made this tool for a reason, guys. I made it for a reason. I even made it free. And Uber couldn't take 10 seconds to consult with my tool before making such a big decision. But I knew something was going on here. There's no way Uber could make such an elementary error. Maybe this man just wasn't qualified for the job. Maybe he's just not the right person to be Uber's chief diversity officer. Maybe he's just not that bright of an individual. So I decided to look into some of his works online, including this one piece titled "Forget the Business Case for Diversity and Inclusion." Nothing guarantees success in a business like an article saying forget the business case for making drastic changes to a company's culture. The house burned in front of them, but they wanted data to prove it. That is the audacity and ridiculousness of making the business case, convincing one of the obvious. Of course, Bernard at no point in this article ever makes the obvious case. Make the business case is the retort often heard in Silicon Valley when talks of diversity and inclusion comes up. This myopic and dense argument grows tiresome. To have to make the case why diversity and inclusion is important is infuriating. Still hasn't made the case. What is basically being said is, convince me why the organization should want to hire women, people of color, etc. No, what's basically being said is convince me why I should want to hire women, people of color, etc., just because they're a woman or a person of color. When you examine the ranks of most tech companies, it is statistically improbable that senior ranks would be devoid of women and people of color, considering the makeup of our country, which has over 326 million people. 326 million people. Do qualifications mean nothing to you? Literally all of America is qualified to potentially be a senior level employee at Uber. You think all of America is the hiring pool with which Uber should select from to fill senior level positions? I mean, if you really believe this, you wouldn't use your resume when you go to any company to get a new job. You wouldn't have used your qualifications as Hillary for America's chief diversity officer when you were trying to get a job at Uber. You would have just said, I'm one of 326 million people of America, and you need diversity. Hire me. Certainly, from a global pool of 7.5 billion people, we could find talent that can run and or ascend into leadership roles. The lack of diversity then defies logic, which is especially paradoxical considering that the tech ecosystem prides itself on logic. Certainly, from a population of Earth, Uber can find some qualified people, right? Can they speak English? Who cares? Do they have internet access? We'll worry about that later. There's 7.5 billion people on planet Earth. It's a very diverse group of people, and Uber isn't anywhere near as diverse as Earth. Blacks are 13% of the population, yet 75% of the NBA. Statistically improbable. Blacks are 13% of the population, 70% of the NFL. Statistically improbable. 18 of the last 22 winners of the Scripps National Spelling Bee, including all champions for the most recent 10 years, have been Indian Americans. Indian Americans make up less than 1% of the U.S. population. Statistically improbable. In 2013, there were 149 male marathon performances faster than 2 hours and 10 minutes. 80 of those were by Kenyans, 47 by Ethiopians, plus 8 by Eritreans and Ugandans from the same region and similar ethnicity. That's 134 out of 149. In the 2013 merit rankings compiled by allathletics.com, only 9 of the top 100 men are not East African. Statistically improbable. It requires the tech industry to take an honest assessment of how we arrived at this non-diverse, non-inclusive environment that somehow does not mirror the society we all inhabit. Look, Uber's numbers may not mirror society or Earth, but you can't say it isn't diverse. Thankfully, Uber provides some of these numbers for us. If you go to uber.com/diversity, they have some of their self-reported diversity numbers. Scroll down a bit and you'll see, oh, look at this guy, Bernard Coleman himself, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion. Go down a little bit more and you'll see the What We Look Like section, containing some breakdowns by race and ethnicity. Now remember, Asians are 5 to 6% of the US population. Yet at Uber, they make up 31% of the entire company. Break this down by tech, and they are nearly half of the entire company, 48%. And while we're here, Uber, hire a new designer. What the hell is this shit? Look at this circle chart. It has 6 shades of green in the legend that are nearly indistinguishable from one another. How is anybody supposed to be able to map these to the chart? Like, how did this make it through your design department? So hire a new designer and make sure they aren't Asian or white, because that's almost the entire chart. Now, the reason I bring up Asians is because Bernard himself was talking about how Uber can increase diversity. After all, there are 326 million people in America, not to mention the 7.5 billion people on Earth that Uber could hire from. He's literally opening up the population of qualified people to the entire fucking planet. But then on their own diversity page, all of a sudden, diversity needs to be restricted. We now need to restrict that population to a smaller group. We're working to ensure that Uber is an inclusive environment for everyone, and that we recruit, develop, and retain people from communities that are typically underrepresented in the tech sector. We're dedicating $3 million over the next 3 years to support organizations working to bring more women and underrepresented people into tech. So it's statistically improbable that Uber's own employees wouldn't mirror those of the 326 million Americans or the 7 billion people on planet Earth. Yet when it comes to increasing diversity at Uber, all of a sudden now you're restricting that population down to exclude the minority that's 5 to 6% of the US population, yet almost half of the entire tech department at Uber. This moment is about having a tough conversation, not silencing dissent, but actually hearing what others have to say, no matter how much we may disagree. Yes, Bernard, let's have a tough conversation about how you think you work in a non-inclusive, non-diverse industry, yet your own company has Asians that represent 31% of the company, half of the tech department, despite being 5 to 6% of the US population. Statistically improbable. Ideas and ideologies cannot be fired or quieted. It is essential to know the level of receptiveness to potential programs and interventions. Organizations need to understand the climate for acceptance and must carefully craft an implementation plan right-sized for the current culture. If you push people too fast when they aren't primed, you can have an all-out insurrection or unexpected consequences. Translation: if you drop a frog in boiling water, if you introduce diversity and inclusion and start hiring people based on skin color and gender rather than their ability to do the job, they might not like it. So it's best to slowly introduce these policies so they don't even really notice it. So Bernard, despite saying that the case for diversity and inclusion is obvious, never actually tells us why. He just says it's obvious and leaves it at that. But he also shows us his horrible line of thinking, which may be part of the reason why he didn't get the job of Chief Diversity Officer at Uber. Again, he looks at the lack of a certain type of diversity within Uber and thinks something's wrong here. There's an entire population of 7 billion people Uber could hire from. I can only hope Bernard isn't in a position where he's actually hiring employees, because hiring is already a very time-intensive and expensive process, even when you aren't looking at a pool that's as big as all of America or the entire planet. But maybe we should forget the business case for that too.